This Equipment World video is brought to you by Chevron Delo 600 ADF Ultra Low Ash Diesel Engine Oil. It's time to kick some ash.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Equipment World. You're watching The Dirt. I'm your host Brian, and today we're going to talk about something that we've touched on with Chevron multiple times. We're going to talk about fluid testing. We've kind of flirted with it so far, talking about kind of why it's important to establish fluid testing or what's kind of involved with fluid testing, but we've really never focused in on how do you actually go about starting up a fluid testing protocol, and what does that look like, and what's it going to cost you, and how do you take samples, and where do you send them to, and all of the questions that come out of that conversation. So today we're going to talk to Jaye Russo from Chevron to talk specifically about what it looks like to start a fluid testing routine.
But before we get into that, I want to take a second to tell you about the sponsor of this video, Chevron Lubricants. Protecting your diesel engine and its exhaust aftertreatment system has traditionally been seen as an either-or proposition when it comes to choosing the engine oil that's going to protect your system. And that's exactly why Chevron spent more than a decade of R&D work developing a no-compromise formulation. Now, I don't have to tell you why a clogged DPF is bad news, but here's the real kick in the pants. 90% of that ash clogging up your DPF and then upping your fuel and maintenance costs, it comes from your engine oil. You might be thinking, why don't they make an engine oil with less ash in it then? You'll be happy to learn that Chevron agrees with you. They've developed a new ultra low ash diesel engine oil that is specifically designed to combat DPF ash clogging. Delo 600 ADF with OmniMax technology cuts sulfate ash by 60%, radically reducing the rate of DPF clogging and extending the DPF service life by 2.5 times. Before you had to choose between protecting your engine or your aftertreatment system. Now you don't. Delo 600 ADF with OmniMax technology. It's time to kick some ash.
Well, Jay, thank you for taking some time to be on The Dirt today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Appreciate it.
So my first question for you, I'm going to lob you a softball. What is the benefit of establishing a fluid testing protocol versus just changing your fluids on recommended intervals?
Yeah, and the surprising answer to that, the overall is, and the one that's most important, is cost savings, right? At the end of the day, you think about, man, we're adding cost to this rather than, just changing the oil and doing it without the analysis, which is going to cost me more money. It's, but it's actually the other way around, because you end up saving money in the long run. And, we look at, improper lubrication is about 70% of equipment failures today. So this is where you really want to kind of take a deep dive into what your lubricant's doing in your system. With used oil analysis or just fluid analysis in general, I hate to say used oil analysis, because sometimes we do it ongoing, right? We're not necessarily looking at it at the end of its life. But you get a detailed breakdown of lubrication performance. You get to understand all the wear elements that are in the oil that could be coming from the engine or whatever compartment that fluid is in. You also get to see some of the elements that are included in the additive package, some of the good stuff that's in the oil, and you measure not only the bad but the good. So you get to see that your oil is performing and not breaking down, right? And you also get to see things along the lines of, fuel dilution, things along those lines. And it really helps to diagnose problems before they occur. And that's where it starts talking about the cost savings, right? This is where we start. You start to uncover things that are happening. If you start to see wear metals like copper, then you might say, oh man, maybe that's a little bit of a bearing wear, and maybe we need to back out on the drain interval and start changing the oil a little more often to keep that from occurring. But those are some of the things that you might start to see, and you end up with fewer repairs and lower downtime. And we all know that having our equipment up and running is making us money, and that's what the name of the game is: maximum efficiency. And your equipment's going to last longer. At the end of the day, your equipment is going to outlive the expectation if you're doing a good job of really taking care of it and studying the oil and fluid analysis of each one of those compartments. So, there's lots of good things there that really kind of roll up into cost savings. And, we look at return on investment of used oil analysis and fluid analysis. It's about 150%. So, you're looking at, negotiated rates under $10 per sample, depending on what you're doing and what kind of sampling you're really looking for. You're under $10 per sample. So, and you get about 150% return on that. So, I mean, that's pretty good, rate of return in my book.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to kind of reiterate what you were saying, just because you're changing fluids on the interval specified by the manufacturer, your owner's manual, that doesn't necessarily mean you're doing a great job. You're doing a good job because you're at least changing on a regular interval, but there's a lot that could go wrong even outside of that.
Exactly. And then on the flip side of that as well, you could see that on those intervals that the OEM specifies, there's still a lot of life left in that oil. You're not seeing anything happen. The oil's still in good shape. So that's where you see an opportunity to extend your drains. And that's what we like to do with our customers, is look for opportunities to where our oil will perform very well and shine, where we can extend the drains, from 500 hours to 750 hours, something along those lines. But you have to do that with proper fluid maintenance and proper fluid analysis, like what we're talking about.
Interesting. So the other thing that occurs to me is you've got multiple ways to get that return on your investment, whether it's through premature failure or through extended drain intervals, or there's a lot of different ways that you can get that money back. So my next question for you is a two-part question. The first one is kind of coming at this from a dirt contractor standpoint. What fluids would you recommend I pull and get sampled regularly? And then kind of on the backside of that question, when you guys do samples, and we don't have to get way down into the weeds, but kind of what are you guys looking for when you analyze those samples?
Yeah, so, really when I look at construction and that kind of industry, you're definitely looking at engine oil, transmissions, coolants, hydraulic systems, your gear, differentials, final drives, things along those lines, and sometimes even fuel testing. I mean, if you're at a site where it might have been dormant over the winter or something like that, and you come back and you've got 10,000 gallons of diesel fuel, maybe you want to pull a sample out and send that off, and labs can do that as well. Or if you're having some issues with some fuel system issues, you don't know what it is, maybe it's algae or something growing in the fuel, you can do some fuel testing. But really the primaries is engine, transmission, coolants, hydraulic systems, final drives, things along those lines. And and the intervals vary on those. We always tell people that we recommend to do it on the OEM recommended drain intervals. Go ahead and pull a sample whenever you're doing a change out. But so engine oil, that's 250, 500 hours. Transmissions is probably every other time you do an engine oil change, you would do a transmission check. And then coolants, coolants is an interesting one, because there's a lot of shops out there and a lot of testing measures that shops can do on their own with coolants, where you don't have to send a sample off. You can do refractometers where you can be measuring the freeze point of the product. There's all kinds of test strips. The problem with coolant analysis is that you have to make sure that the tools, those test strips, and those parameters that you're looking at match the coolant that you're running in the equipment, because there's lots of different technologies on coolants, and there's lots of different technologies for testing that you have to make sure you're matching up directly with the right formula there. So sometimes, if you don't have that equipment and you don't have a good relationship with your supplier where you know exactly what you need, it's a good idea just to go ahead and send that off to the lab as well. Hydraulic systems and all that other stuff, it's all pretty standard, and running that on about 1,000 hour drains, or 1,000 hours, looking at every other time you do an oil change, go ahead and pull a sample from those systems as well. What we're really looking for, and like I said before, it's in these fluid analysis, it's looking at wear metals, contamination as far as dirt. You're trying to understand what's getting into the system, what's failing within the system, right? So if you start looking at wear metals, and then you can start to work with your OEM to pinpoint, okay, well, where in this system am I getting lead? Or where in this system is aluminum coming from? Or, where is copper coming from? So then you start to dig into that, and as, analysts, whether it's Chevron or one of the labs, they'll give you some hints about, well, you might be seeing this from bearings, or you might be experiencing some gear wear, or you might be, if you've got a lot of silicon, you might in an engine oil, you might say, wow, that's could be coming from environmental dirt. So on the analysis, they'll actually give you a little bit of a head start and say, well, we're seeing high levels of of silicone, which is, environmental dirt that's getting into the engine oil, and it's causing a little bit of wear. It's causing we're seeing some fuel dilution, something along those lines. So maybe check your air filter, check your air intake. Maybe there's an issue there. So, that's the beauty about the labs, is they'll give you a little bit of a hint to get you on the right direction of thinking and giving you a recommendation of what to do next. They say if you didn't drain and refill when you sent this sample, now's a good time to do it. I would go bring that piece of equipment back in, drain it, and keep an eye on it. Let's check the next one. It's those little things like that. But really what we're looking for is outside contaminants, wear metals on the inside, and things along those lines. And making sure that the additive package is still going good, right? So like I said before, you'll see some of the elements that should be present within those additive packages, and the labs will know that. They'll be able to indicate that and say, it looks like this engine oil or this transmission fluid at the end of its life, we recommend a flush and refill.
It's really interesting to me. I guess I'm a typical dirt guy in the sense of I've always thought, fluid analysis is one of those things you don't really need. It's one of those things, it's an add-on service that you're going to pay extra for to tell you need to change your oil. Well, yeah, that's why I'm doing this. But the more you talk about the analysis and the more I've heard other Chevron people talk about doing the fluid analysis, it is incredible to me how much information can be gleaned from those samples, and really pretty detailed information of you've got a specific bearing going out.
Yeah, it's really interesting the level of detail we can get. And the really cool part is it's not just the detail in that one sample. It's when you're part of a program, you're working with a supplier, lab partner, and you're really getting trending analysis of each component within whatever unit. I don't care whether you have 1 unit or 10 units or 1,000 units or 10,000 units, doesn't matter, right? You're going to be able to see that level of data, and it's good to get started early, and because you'll see that over years. I mean, I've got customers that I do some fluid analysis with. We've got 5-10 years of history on some of these pieces of equipment, and it's really nice because you can start to tell the story of what's been going on within that engine or that transmission or that differential over the period of time.
So before I forget to ask, if I have, as a contractor, if I have questions about what oils I should be pulling samples from, what some numbers mean, how to get a correct sample, who can I reach out to, whether it's Chevron specific or an oil supplier? Who are my resources there?
Yeah, so again, it's either, we've got, for Chevron selfishly, it's chevronlubricants.com. It's a great website. We've got a wealth of knowledge. We have a whole section of information on the website specifically for fluid analysis, and we call it our Lube Watch program. And then we also have a hotline, 1-800-LUBE-TECH, LUBETEK, and that there's fluid engineers that are standing by waiting to take your call, and it doesn't matter whether you're a Chevron customer or any other lubricant supply, it doesn't matter. They will help you get you to the right people, get you the right answers, and get you going in the right direction. So those are two really good good resources, and all that information is on chevronlubricants.com. There's actually a chat feature at the bottom of the website where you can just start chatting in that box, and it'll get you directed to the Lube Tech engineers as well.
So my next question, I want to kind of start to go down the road of getting into the nitty-gritty of what it's like to take oil samples for some of these guys who've never done it before. So one of the first questions I have is, how do you even go about getting a good, clean oil sample, and how critical is it that sample, can you use an old funnel? Can you use an old oil container? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it's I've over 18 years that I've been doing this. I've seen a lot of interesting things and a lot of interesting ways of technicians taking oil samples. And honestly, the most common way is you climb under the truck, or the piece of equipment, you drop the drain plug, you let a little bit flow out, and then you start to capture whatever you can with a sample bottle and wipe all of it off that's that's on the side, right? So that's the most common way. Does that work? Yeah, sure. I mean, it'll work. There's lots of chances for cross contamination, whether it's dirt that's on the oil pan that it's running down, or lint that's on that rag that that you wipe the bottle off with, right? There's lots of issues with that, but it gets you a certain percentage of the way home, right? Now, by doing it properly, it takes some specialized tools and some equipment that you need to make that happen, right? So, and it's nothing that's expensive. It's nothing that's hard to get. Some of the stuff you can get at your local hardware store, but you need to try to take the samples from the middle of the middle of the reservoir, whether it's an engine or a transmission or a differential. Don't just take it from the bottom or the top. Try to get in the middle, because that's a better representative of what's actually going through that system, right? So for engines, going through the dipstick tube is a good way. You get a vacuum pump, a hand operated vacuum pump that the sample bottle screws right into, and you get some tubing, plastic tubing, and there again, you might be doing all the right things, but you need to pull a representative sample out of it, pull one bottle through, dump, use that for a waste oil, and then get another fresh one, so you make sure any contamination that was in the pump, any contamination that was in the tube, all that stuff is taken care of, and you end up with your second bottle that is the best representation possible that you can send to the lab. So it's things along those lines, and there's lots of other neat things. Some like most equipment these days, newer equipment has sampling ports, and having the proper equipment to be able to pull directly out of those sampling ports is really important. And again, it's just a needle that goes into the sampling port, tube into the pump, or directly into the bottle. Again, you need to flush that tube, you need to flush that needle, and you need to make sure that what's going in the bottle and what's going to the lab is the best representation possible. And one thing along this line as well that's very important that I see a lot of mistakes happen with fleets is that inaccurate information that they give to the lab about what the oil is. So you got to make sure that what the proper name of the oil is. Make sure it kind of follows exactly what's on the MSDS sheet. Making sure that the hours are accurate that are on the equipment, and what the unit number is, all that stuff, right? Because sometimes we get information from the lab, and we look at it and we're like, what piece of equipment was this for again? And it just it spirals out of control because you don't really keep good records of those things. So proper sampling procedures is very, very important, and then really good data to the lab when you're sending in the samples is very important, because the nice part about fluid analysis is once you get the sample to the lab, it takes the turnaround time is only like 24 hours. So if you've got a piece of equipment that's for some reason is critical, the better information you get and the better sample you get, they get it back to you in 24 hours. They might tell you need to pull that out and change the oil now, right? Or if you're doing something different. So there's lots of benefits to doing things the right way.
So kind of sticking in the vein of your tools, again, coming at this from a total place of ignorance, I always think of you need a lab coat and safety glasses and beakers, but when it comes to actually pulling samples on the contractor's end, outside of maybe the vacuum hand pump or some hoses to interface with those sample ports, are there really any other specialized tools I need, or are all of the sample containers and everything provided by the lubricant company that's doing the testing?
Yeah, so the labs, you definitely need to go to the lab to get sample bottles, right? It's always best to use the sample bottles that they provide. They'll tell you, if you just send it to me in a clean bottle, they'll sample it, but their sample bottles are assured to be clean. A lot of times what happens is you can do it a couple different ways with the labs. You can prepay for a sample. So if you say you need a C2 engine sample, they'll send you a sample bottle in a box with a label, with everything ready to go. So all you have to do is fill the sample bottle, cap it, put the information on the tag, send it in, and it's prepaid and done. Or you can have an account set up where they'll invoice you back, on that. So it just depends on what the preference is. But one of the things that is a big tool that I do not see a lot of times is lint-free rags. And like I said, if you wipe off a sample port and you wipe it off with a regular shop rag or a regular blue towel, whatever it is, and then you take a sample, then all of a sudden now you've got some lint that could have come in, entered into that sample. So it's lint-free rags is one of those ones that I always see that step gets missed quite a bit. And I'll say too, the flushing of the system, and then people reusing the tubing. I mean, once you use that tube with that engine and that reservoir, you don't want to use that tube for the next one, because it could cross-contaminate whatever's going on in that engine with the other one. So it's the tubing's cheap. All these supplies are fairly cheap, and that's why it's set up to where these are more consumables for every sample you take. But I mean, really, as far as sample kits, the different labs, they sell different sample kits. Chevron sells sample kits, that has all the tools you need, things to hook up to the sample ports. Some of them are screw ports, some of them are pinholes, the tubing, the pumps, and we're talking, a couple $100. We have some sample kits that are really nice and really expensive and are really, have a lot of stuff in them. It might be, $500-$600. But, most of the time it's pretty reasonable. You can take really good samples for a couple $100.
So that takes a little bit of the dauntingness out of this whole thing. So my final question for you is, a lot of people think fluid analysis is really for the larger companies that have fleet managers and they've got, dedicated technicians. And is fluid analysis really a viable option for an owner-operator who owns 3 pieces of equipment, changes his own oil on weekends? I mean, is it still worth the investment, one? And two, from a standpoint of making it worth his while versus just doing the drain intervals, is it worth doing fluid testing?
Well, I think it goes back to what I said in the beginning, right? The return on investment from what we see for a fluid analysis program is about 150%. Let's just say they were $10 per sample. I mean, it's still pretty reasonable when you're talking about a piece of equipment that costs what they do today. Equipment is not cheap. Dozers, excavators. I mean, you're getting to $1 million really quick with a very small fleet. It's definitely worth protecting your investment, and $10 per sample is a pretty cheap insurance about protecting your components. One thing I will say is that the labs treat everybody the same. They treat every bottle that walks into that door the same. They take the sample out of the box and they see, okay, I need to do this test on it. They put it in the same machine as everybody else's, and it runs the test. You get the analysis, and it just uploads it into your, do the analysis, and they upload the results into your system. And the systems, everybody gets access to. They can either get samples mailed to them, they can get samples sent via email, or the results. They can get the results via, a mobile app even. I mean, we have it on our phones. It's really awesome. And everybody gets the same service from that point of view. Now, large customers, some really large fleets, they will, the labs will treat them a little differently in a way that maybe they get better discounts, right, on the oil sampling, because they're sending in thousands of samples a year versus 10. They might get some things that go along with that. Could be business reviews and support, where they actually do some of that analysis and trending analysis within the web-based tools that they offer you. The tools are there. You can spend the time doing it yourself, or you could pay the labs to do that for you. I don't know what those fees are for the labs, but I do know that, as being a Chevron Lubricants customer, we provide that as a value-added service for all of our customers. It doesn't matter whether you're a small fleet or a large fleet. That's what we do. We have a team of analysts that do that, and we provide the results and analyze those results. So, we're prepared to do that, and that's what we love doing, and we love, providing those additional services to our customers.
Well, Jay, thank you. This has been really informative, and like I said, it really does take a lot of the dauntingness out of this, because I think a lot of small guys think of this as being a white lab coat operation, and it's not. It's really straightforward when you start delving into it.
Yeah, and I think too, people don't understand what the cost is. You know, it's a very low upfront cost to get going. I mean, you know, ordering some sample bottles, some prepaid kits, you know, like I say, they're under $10 a piece when you're working with somebody. And that's the thing about the pricing with Chevron. You know, if you're utilizing our Lube Watch program, we're passing the savings that Chevron, the bulk savings that Chevron is getting along to our customers. So, you know, if you were to call one of the labs independently, you know, maybe it's more than $10. But, you know, by leveraging our Lube Watch program, we're passing that savings on to the customer. And as far as the equipment, like I said, you can, if all you want to do is take oil samples from from when you're draining the oil, you can get away with that if you don't want to invest $250 or whatever it is but I mean, this stuff is very minimal and it's worth doing it the right way up front versus, you know, kind of cutting corners for sure.
Well, thank you again to Chevron and specifically to Jaye for coming onto the show today to give us an idea of what it takes to start a fluid testing protocol and to kind of take some of the dauntingness out of that conversation. So if you guys have any questions or comments, obviously drop them down below, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode of The Dirt.